The 639th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled.
Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for three. Back iron, 1 second to play, stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win.
Got it!
Luke May!
He got it!
0.3 seconds! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Saturday night, a disappointing Saturday night if you're a Carolina basketball fan. Only even more so compounded if you're like me that you're a Carolina Panther fan. Both teams lose today. We're here to talk, though, about the Carolina basketball loss at SMU, 97-83. We'll take a look at the box score. I'll deliver you the quote of the game from head coach Hubert Davis. We'll give our stat of the game, thoughts, takeaways, your input from the game as well as Carolina goes on the road for just the second time this year, first time in league play, and they lose to SMU 97-83 to fall to 13-2 on the year and 1-1 in the league. The 97 points are the most Carolina has allowed this season. And it's the second worst defensive efficiency game for Carolina in the Ken Pom era, which, counting this season dates back to 29 years. So arguably the second worst defensive performance we've seen from Carolina basketball over the last 30 years. Primarily in the second half is where it all came unglued for the Heels. They gave up 58 points to SMU in the final 20 minutes. That's more points allowed in the half than they allowed to Central Arkansas, North Carolina Central, and East Carolina in the entire game. Those were 3 wins for Carolina earlier this year, where they allowed less than 58 points over 40 minutes. The Heels gave up 58 points in 20 minutes alone this afternoon. And it was a day where, as you can imagine by the score total, SMU was hot. They shoot 60% from the field, over 71% from the field in the second half. And they shoot 52% from three on 14 makes from behind the three-point line. Boopy Miller, who I said in the preview was going to be the fourth best player on the floor in this game, he was the best player on the floor. He led the Mustangs with 27 points on 10 of 13 shooting for Carolina. Seth Trimble, back-to-back 20-point performances for him. He scored 20 points for Carolina on 8 of 16 shooting for the Heels in the loss. A lot to unpack here. And that's the beauty of conference play is you learn a lot more about your team, whether it's game 2, game 12, game 18. I do think we learned a lot about this group. I think some of it was highlighted beliefs that we maybe already had around the point guard position, free throw shooting, so on and so forth. Just did not see them struggling this much defensively. We talked about how good SMU was in the preview from shooting the ball from, inside the 3-point line. And look, they got 36 points in the paint. So they were able to do what they do really, really well in that category. But 14 threes, a lot of them uncontested, a lot of them just catch and shoot rhythm threes. And it was simply because Carolina switched one too many times and their floor balance was really bad, where you're trying to chase down, shooters that you were 10, 15 feet disconnected from. I thought Hubert Davis was outcoached. I thought his team was out physicaled. And all in all, it chalks up to, I'll call it a frustrating loss, not disappointing, because I think the disappointment comes in a lack of maybe effort. I thought Carolina maybe played hard and competed, but I thought the game was a lot more winnable than the final score may have indicated. Had they done some things differently in the second half, something they've done a really good job of this year, that wasn't the case today, and it chalks up to a second loss for the season for Carolina and their first one here in ACC play.
Yeah, what's frustrating is that you battled back after a slow start. I mean, Carolina certainly did not get off to a fast start by any means, but then all of a sudden, Carolina puts together a little bit of a run there at the end of the first half, gets themselves back into it, and you thought, okay, well, maybe this is when Carolina turns it on. Maybe in the second half, we see the second half performances that we've seen from Carolina at certain times this year in some of the bigger games that Carolina's played. That was not the case in this game. SMU comes out, puts together a 13-3 run that extends the lead to 10, and then from that point, Carolina just had nothing for them the rest of the way defensively. Boopy Miller was able to get to pretty much anywhere that he wanted on the floor, 27 points. The scary part is on 10 of 13 shooting. That's what's crazy, is that you weren't able to throw him off his game at all. And then the outside shooting for SMU the entire game was just something that, I said the other night after the game against Florida State, you didn't need to necessarily be that concerned with what Carolina did defensively against Florida State, in terms of the 3-point shots that they allowed, the looks that they allowed in that game. I think part of that was just that Florida State just didn't make shots in that game. I think Carolina gave them very similar looks in that game when looking back on it that they gave in this game. And in this game, those shots were falling pretty much every single time that they ended up throwing a shot up from the outside. It felt like when they needed one to go down, it went down. Corey Washington was fantastic for them. 7 of 10 from the field, 5 of 7 from beyond the arc. Carolina had no answers for him. And a big part of it was that Carolina was switching a lot of stuff on the perimeter, and that's what led to, some moments where Caleb Wilson gets stuck on Boopy Miller, and Boopy Miller ends up putting him on the floor before knocking down a step-back three. It was just some of those mismatches that were incredibly frustrating throughout the entire day. You saw nothing thrown SMU's way to try to throw them off. It was the same defensive scheme the entire time from Carolina. The full court press, they did throw it out there one time. They ended up getting a turnover, if I'm remembering the possession correctly. And from that point forward, you never saw it again. That was what was frustrating from that perspective, was that there were some things that you could have done, it felt like, to throw off the rhythm of this SMU offense, and Carolina just never did it in this game. And so it leads to a blowout loss to an SMU team that's good, but definitely isn't great. I think it's one of those teams that will probably be on the bubble to make the NCAA tournament. And so while it is a quad one loss, it's one that I think, looking back on it for Carolina, you should look at as unacceptable. The way that Carolina had been playing, you would have felt like they would have put together a much better effort on that end of the floor. in this game. I mean, they were allowing opponents to shoot just 36.1%. And part of that is that, yes, you did play some lesser opponents, but when you're second in the country in free throw or in field goal percentage allowed to opponents, that's because you're defending at a high rate. It didn't feel like you saw that effort necessarily from Carolina at times today. There was no pressuring the basketball from these guys, and things just felt way too easy for SMU, and it's the reason why you're heading back to Chapel Hill after just your second road game of the season with a pretty tough loss that will have some people, and already has some people in this fan base reeling.
Yeah, look, I find it hard-pressed to call a road loss in league play against a quad one opponent unacceptable. I was asked before the game, how legit is SMU? Because they were really good last year in the non-con. Remember, Carolina beat them at home in a quad one game, and it kind of began the downward spiral for that group. SMU is going to make the NCAA tournament, and they're probably going to be a pretty healthy seed, I think, come Selection Sunday. You see the way that they score, you see the way that they play, the physicality that they play with. It's only year 2 for Andy Hetfield, with that program. I think he's got them positioned to be, a really quality team this year, and building off of his success where he had a USC, where he made, I think 6 NCAA tournaments during his time with that program. What's not acceptable is how you got beat. Because I thought at halftime, it was 39-39, and I'm sitting there thinking that my dumb self, I thought Carolina was going to win the game, because I thought there were chances in the first half where it could have gotten sideways. And like this team has done, they competed. They got stops. They made shots. They got themselves back into the game. And it just wasn't there in the second half. Whatever has clicked at halftime just wasn't there today, as was evident by what you mentioned by, you come out and you get blitzed with a 13-3 run, you're automatically back down double digits. And even though there was going to be a lot of possessions and there was still a lot of time, I think it just gave SMU confidence that this was going to be their day, and that it was their moment. And look, they were absolutely sensational. Some of the shots that they made, there's nothing you could have done about it. There were just too many times I felt like, and we talked about this when we previewed the game, you had to keep Boopy Miller just out of the lane, because whenever he got there, it just felt like the rest of Carolina's defense just collapsed behind it. And they didn't rotate, they didn't communicate, and it just felt like once the ball touched the painted area, it spelled bad news. And that was what happened when Carolina got beaten down by Michigan State, Jeremiah Fears. And the same thing now, and in this game here with Boopy Miller, who was the best player on the floor. And you could argue that Corey Washington was the second best player on the floor in this game, even as good as Seth Trimble may have been. Caleb Wilson was good at times. I thought this was the worst game we've seen Henry Vassar play all year. I thought he got punked. I thought he got beaten up, and I thought his shot selection at times and his decision making at times was what you would have seen from a freshman. There were too many times I felt like he got caught mid-drive, middle of the air. I didn't know what he wanted to do or where he was going, and was either forcing a bad pass, forcing a bad shot, just not playing the way that Carolina has had him play so far this season. This team's at its best when him and Caleb Wilson are controlling both ends of the floor on the interior, and that just simply wasn't the case in this ball game. And that's not something that we were expecting because of the way we've seen them play the first handful of games. So that was maybe kind of a shock to the system that they could never maybe reestablish control of the game. And that's something that's got to be addressed, because what you saw today is not going to change. When they go on the road next week and they play Cal and Stanford, they're going to get hit in the mouth. They're going to get punched. We just saw, what Stanford was able to do, last night. So they beat Louisville. Cal, whether they should have won the game or not, they beat Notre Dame. Those are much more improved basketball teams, and you got to be able to go on the road and win in this league if you want to compete for a conference championship. And so hopefully today was a great learning experience for a team that has a week off and probably had a good time because they have a chance to kind of regroup, kind of look at what they did right, what they did wrong, and improve before they'll host what's going to be a desperate Wake Forest team next Saturday, and team in dire need of a quad one win if they want to make the NCAA tournament. Let's take a look at the box score. I'll pull it up for you guys watching back at home. Carolina shoots 48% from the field, which you shoot 48% from the field on the road and 43% from three on the road should be good enough for you to win the ball game. But that's not the case when you allow your opponent to shoot 60% from the field, 52% from behind the three-point line. Both teams left points at the foul line. Carolina goes 13 of 19 for 68%. SMU goes 11 of 16 for 69%. Just 10 turnovers led to 13 points for SMU. On the flip side, though, Carolina forces just 7 turnovers. They score 9 points off of that. Rebounding, Carolina wins the rebounding margin 30-29. It was 20-14, though, at halftime, so not a lot of rebounds there to be had in the second half. They got out-rebounded defensively, 23-21, but they did win the battle of the offensive boards 9-6. Both teams with 6 second chance points. Bench points, favor of Carolina, 23-15, in large part to Jaron Stevenson, who scored 16 points, was 5 of 6 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3. Points in the paint, 36-28 in favor of SMU. Fast break points, 15-11 in favor of SMU. Blocks, 5-1 in favor of SMU. Steals were even at 4. How about 23 assists on 36 made baskets for SMU? 21 assists for Carolina on their 29 made baskets. The game was tied 6 times. There were 10 lead changes. All in all, though, Carolina led for just 4 minutes and 6 seconds. Before we get to the quote of the game, anything from the box score that stood out to you watching back at home?
Well, I think one of the things that you pointed out going into this game was that Carolina had to win the specialty stats, and they basically won none of them. So that's an area that, we looked at going into this game and said Carolina had to be better than SMU in a lot of those areas. And if they weren't, then this was going to be a much closer game, or was going to be a game that Carolina ended up losing. They don't end up winning the battle in points off of turnovers, 10 turnovers to 7 for Carolina in this game. Didn't think that turnovers were necessarily, disastrous outside of the first couple of minutes. That's really what set Carolina behind the 8 ball. But again, we said it, they were able to get themselves back into a position to be able to win the game. It was just for some reason at the start of that second half, they didn't come out with the same energy that they had at the end of that first half. But yeah, as I said, bench points, that was an area that they did end up winning 23-15, but that was about the only area that they ended up winning. Points in the paint, it was SMU 36-28. I know that doesn't seem like a lot considering they scored 97, but really whenever SMU wanted to get inside, they were able to. And it's part of the reason why they were able to draw so many defenders down and ultimately kick out for some of these open threes throughout the day. We saw that so many different times, and that's what's frustrating if you're a Carolina fan, is just you can't stay in front of guys. I mean, they haven't been able to do it really for the last month or so, and it's been something that we've been harping on, an area that they have to get better, but it just hasn't gotten better as time has gone along. Fast break points, they don't even win in that area. There was, some times, especially early on in the game, where SMU was able to get up and down the floor at will and finish at the rim pretty easily, or finish with some wing threes. 15-11 in that area in favor of SMU. Those are areas that you would think that Carolina would be able to win, and they just didn't find a way to come away with that. We talked about free throw shooting being important for Carolina in this game. Luckily for SMU, they only shot 69%, or else this game could have been even uglier. But Carolina at the foul line shoots just 68%. So that was, again, an area where you could have helped yourself. You could have kept the game a little bit closer, could have changed some of the momentum at certain points in the game, but Carolina wasn't able to knock down their free throw shots. So those specialty areas that we talked about being so important coming into this game, Carolina just not able to get it done.
All right, let's get to the quote of the game. I'll read it really quickly for you guys. This was Schubert's opening statement talking about what went wrong defensively in the second half, where SMU shoots 70% from the field. Hubert said, quote, "Yeah, they were just able to get anywhere they wanted to. Offensively, Boopy was in control of the ball, whether it's one-on-one, ball screen action, his patience, being able to get to his spots, being able to score, being able to distribute. We tried to take the ball out of his hands, and guys stepped up and made shots, but he's still able to get the ball to his teammates at the right spot to be able to do something with it, and he played a terrific game," end quote. Got to tell you, worst defensive game I think that Seth Trimble's played by far this year because of the limited action. And I would argue in the last 3 years where he's really emerged as a key perimeter defender for Carolina, and that's usually job number one is, hey, take away X player offensively. Whatever you do scoring-wise is just going to be, kind of icing on the cake for what we're asking and what we need from you in this game. And I thought, he couldn't stay in front of him. I thought there were times that, whenever Boopy had to create separation with his body, just moved guys right out of the way. But I also felt like, there was just never an adjustment that could have been made, or that they should have made, to try to just take him out of the rhythm of the game. You saw the one full court press, Carolina run and jumped. At one point, they give up an easy bucket. And I think you got to remind yourselves, at some point, teams are going to break the press. At some point, they're going to make the right pass if you run and jump them. But that doesn't mean that you quit doing it. That just because you give up a bucket doesn't mean, well, that's all she wrote. We can't do that again. And it just felt like we were never the aggressor. We got beat, it felt like, to every spot on the floor, to every loose ball. And it was all started by him. And I think that's going to be something we got to watch moving forward, because you don't see that a lot from Seth. And how much of this was he saying to himself, I got to save myself defensively because of what they're asking me to do offensively, where he was Carolina's point guard the majority of the game, because this just in, Kai and Evans might not be able to play at this level. And we'll get to that here in just a moment. But, I don't want to take away from Boopy. We've seen him in this league for a long time. He's a tremendous player. But my God, he's not that good to where you don't think there's anything you could do differently to try to slow him down, and really frustrated by the lack of adjustments made by Hubert Davis and this coaching staff.
Yeah, I think that certainly is where the frustration lies with. It should lie with both the players and the coaching staff. It was just poor execution by Carolina out there for most of the day. They had absolutely nothing for Miller, especially, as Hubert pointed to in that second half. Boopy was pretty much able to get wherever he wanted to go. I thought first half they did a better job against him. I thought he was just hitting some tough shots. And I think that's just something that you have to come to terms with when you got a player that's as good as he is. But in that second half, it really felt like there was absolutely no resistance. And you thought there would be some sort of adjustment from the coaching staff to try to do something, double him. It doesn't matter. Get the ball out of his hands and make somebody else beat you. And maybe that wouldn't have worked anyways, because, Corey Washington was shooting the ball incredibly well. BJ Edwards had his moments where he was playing well. But I would have liked to just see some sort of concerted effort to change the way that the game was going, change the picture for Boopy Miller and make things a little bit more difficult on him. It never happened. It's why he ends up being as efficient as he does, 10 of 13. It's why he, ends up with 12 assists in the game. That's a crazy number. I know he was sharing the basketball well coming into this game, but I don't think anybody could have seen that coming from Boopy Miller in this one. So, for Carolina, it's got to be frustrating for, for the guys on the team and the coaching staff, But at the same time, it's up to you to make things difficult for a guy that's as successful as Boopy Miller is. And it just never felt like there were the adjustments that were needed from this coaching staff. There were never any adjustments from the guys on the floor. And it's why Carolina walks away with a significant loss against one of the teams that they probably look at and felt like on their schedule out of the quad one games that they're going to play, they probably felt like they had the best opportunity to win. That's what's scary about this, is that you had this performance against a team that is, really good offensively, but a lot of their offensive numbers were put up against weaker opponents. Some of the teams that you're getting ready to play down the stretch in the rest of conference play, or that you'll see when you play, a team like Virginia, who's much better offensively than they've been in years past. When you play a team like Louisville and then eventually Duke, those are teams that are able to put up pretty good amounts of points against some really good opponents. So I think that's ultimately what leaves you scared if you're a Carolina fan here today, is that your best defensive player didn't necessarily look great, and it doesn't seem like his teammates are really able to step up and help him in moments where they need to be able to do that.
Well, what we're also not used to seeing is Carolina just not having the scoring depth on the roster. This team is not built to win games the way they had to win today's game. Once this game became apparent this was going to be played in the upper 80s and the upper 90s, Carolina's not equipped to win that way. It's strange to say that because as Roy Williams' disciples, that's how they won all their games, was because they could just put the ball in the basket and score 90 in their sleep. That hasn't been the case under Hubert, but more because I think he demands more defensively as a coach than Roy Williams did. And so for this roster that's still looking for consistency from the point guard spot, Luka Bogovac is still a work in progress as a scorer. Seth Trimble's still finding his rhythm back after missing 42 days. This game had to be played at 80 points below. And, once it became apparent that it wasn't going to be played that way, there just wasn't enough offense on Carolina's roster today to win that game. Maybe over the next 2 months, they develop the scoring depth we're used to seeing from a team in Carolina Blue. They don't have that scoring depth right now. Stat of the game, I wrote points in the paint. Carolina -8 in that category. They scored 28 points in the paint, not enough. They give up 36 points in the paint, which, I think if we would have said you give up 36, you probably would have lived with that, just because, we mentioned, SMU entered the game making 25 two-point baskets. That's top 5 in the country. And this just in, I know they took some today. They aren't doing that because they're shooting mid-range shots. They're shooting 16, 18-foot jumpers. They're doing that because they're putting the ball inside through, post penetration, second chance points on the offensive rebounds. So you could maybe live with giving up 36 points in the paint with how SMU wanted to attack you. Carolina can't get 28 points in the paint because you can't count on Carolina to make 12 threes every game moving forward. Let alone 12 3-point makes on 43%. And it felt like for the first time since Michigan State, it felt like Caleb Wilson forced the issue. It felt like, there was 2 times where he tried to take his man, one-on-one, and he got called for a travel. I thought there may have been enough contact there to draw a foul. Travel gets called, instead. Just felt like there was too much he was trying to force. And then with Henry Vassar, excuse me, I just thought his decision-making at times just wasn't where you wanted it to be. And I just thought they didn't finish at the rim the way that you're used to seeing them. Carolina had 3 shots at the rim on one possession and score a bucket. It was 3 shots literally point blank at the rim. And the ball just doesn't go inside. And so, I think, we can talk about giving up 36 paint points and be disappointed in that number. I was kind of satisfied with that. But this team isn't built to win when they get 28 points and inside, considering their 2 best players are guys that play at the 4 and the 5 spot.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, is that your guys that you were counting on in this game, they were kind of held in check a little bit. And you get good performances from Seth Trimble and Jaron Stevenson that keep this from making this game even uglier. I mean, this could have been really ugly on a day where they were able to really take away what Caleb Wilson was able to do, what Henry Vassar was able to do. For Henry, it was just another slow start. Just got off to a really rough start out of the gate. As you mentioned, some turnovers for him. Wasn't able to really hit the offensive glass for Carolina to get some of those second chance opportunities, and just wasn't finishing strong inside. That was the frustrating part from him. Even for Caleb, I thought there were times where Caleb wasn't finishing strong inside. I mean, you look at the team as a whole, 8 of 15 on layups in this game. Got to be better than that. When you get these shots at the rim, especially in a high-scoring game, you've got to be able to finish at the rim, and they just weren't able to do that. With Caleb, I thought, they threw a couple of looks at him early that were different, a couple of double teams at him. But throughout the second half, Carolina just didn't get him the basketball. He just simply did not touch the ball in the final 16 minutes of the game. I mean, somebody put it on social media. I think it might have been his mom, that he touched the ball 3 times in the final 16 minutes of the game. That's something that, for Carolina, you've got to make a more concerted effort to get the ball to your best player. I get it. Seth Trimble was having a successful day. Jaron Stevenson was knocking down shots from the outside, but you've got to make it a concerted effort to get the ball into the interior and really find a way to get things going through there, because that's where you are at your best. And I just felt like that wasn't there at times for Carolina. And I think defensively, those guys didn't necessarily have their best days. Now, I mean, they brought it up on the broadcast how versatile these guys are. Yes, they certainly are versatile, both of these big men. But at the same time, you don't want them having to be out on the perimeter as much as they were in this game. So that's something that Carolina's got to figure out. You got to stop switching everything as much as you have the versatility. It really does put some guys in bad spots at times. And I think we saw that in today's game. Even though these guys are good defenders, you don't want to have them going up against the guards that are as talented as Boopy Miller, as talented as Corey Washington. And I think that's one of the other things that really shocked me. We thought that the size advantage for Carolina was going to be the difference in this game. We thought with that size, Carolina is going to be able to get into the paint and be able to score the ball at a pretty high rate. That just never happened in this game, and Carolina was bothered by a smaller team that could really shoot it at times in this one. Give credit to SMU, but at the same time, it's really about Carolina just not doing what they needed to do to come away with a victory in this game.
Well, I think, the thing about what SMU did was they just drove Carolina's size. And look, there are a lot of great players that can be 6'10", that can recover and block and alter shots. And don't get it twisted, man. Caleb Wilson, Henry Vassar, Jaron Stevenson, they've done that at different times this year, where they've got switched onto a smaller guard. That guard tries to take them off the bounce, and there they are to alter the shot. That just wasn't the case today. Some of that was schematics. Like Andy Edfield, we know from his time at Florida Gulf Coast what he did, at USC. And then last year with SMU, they were one of the better offensive teams in the country. He knows how to, scheme up a good offense. And I thought today he did a really good job putting our bigs in conflict, and their small guys beat our big guys. We're not used to seeing that. How do our guys respond to that? We'll go, a long way. And I did go check that tweet from Caleb Wilson's mom. She did say that her son was sick too, by the way. So probably, y'all can obviously maybe hear it in my voice, see it when I cut the camera off. I'm sick, and not just because of the way the teams played. It's just that time of the year where what we like to call in the South the crud is just going around. Maybe her son was dealing with some of that. Still, at the end of the day, man, that's an excuse. And he's not going to let that stand in the way for how he played, because he's too great of a player. He'll just simply get his butt in the gym and try to be a better player because of this. And we'll expect to see that on the court on Saturday evening when they host, Wake Forest, and what's going to feel like a pretty big game at the Smith Center here in early January. Let's get into some more thoughts, more takeaways, from this game. Just kind of one last thing defensively, then we'll move on to something that I think is really the biggest glaring issue coming out of the game. I thought Andy Edfield's, what he did a really good job of doing, and this is something that I have harped on Carolina coaches for my entire life to do, is change the way the game's being played, the flow of the game with your defense that you're playing. And a lot of times, man, you want to get guys sped up. It's why I want the full court press. It's why I want to trap. But what did SMU do? When it felt like Carolina was getting in a rhythm and they had, 4 possessions and they scored on 3 of them or 6 of 8, all of a sudden they throw out, it would basically be a 2-3 zone that would fall back really into a 1-3-1 that flatlined all of Carolina's motion in the middle of the floor, and all of a sudden the offense became stagnated. I mean, the amount of dribbling Carolina did today was very reminiscent to what we saw at different times last year with R.J. Davis and what you saw at different times with Caleb Love, where Trimble, who was phenomenal, 22 points, 5 assists, 0 turnovers, but a lot of times was just dribbling and dribbling and dribbling. And you look at the clock, there's, 6-7 seconds, and you got to make something happen. I know that Carolina's not going to play zone defense a lot, and by God, I don't believe in it. You should be tough enough to guard your man one-on-one. But it felt like today that could have been something where you just give them a different look and just make them have to think, because they never thought. They just played off of instinct. And so that was probably the only adjustment that I could have asked for more outside of the full court pressing, outside of the trapping, was we've seen Hubert play 2-3 zone with the reserves. Are you ever going to play that with your starters? Because today, with as much dribble drive as you gave up, probably would have been a really good time to give them just one different look to maybe try to expose your defense on a day where you just did not have it, allowing them to shoot 60% from the field, 52% from 3.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it at times last year, and I think, that was, getting to a desperate point in certain games, but it felt like you got to that point in this game, and maybe that throwing that out, could have slowed down what SMU was doing. I wouldn't have been against it because, I get it. It's not the sexiest defense, but as long as it's effective, I don't care. I'm here to win games. I don't care about what looks good and what doesn't, what people might say about you if it took that to be able to win the game as opposed to just playing straight up man defense. I mean, this group just is not good enough, it doesn't feel like, to be able to stay in front of their man at certain times when you have these super athletic guards. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that this season. And so you're going to have to get to that point where you're going to have to try some different things. And credit to SMU, because Carolina did a really good job at the end of that first half of attacking the basket, drawing a couple of fouls and everything like that, and getting ultimately where they wanted to go on the floor. And then, they end up throwing out that 2-3 zone. It gave Carolina a much different look. You saw a lot of dribbling, as you talked about, but also a lot of passing around the perimeter. Carolina simply could not get the ball inside the way that they wanted to. And so that would have been just something that would have been nice to see on the other end to sort of counteract what they were doing as well and make things a little bit more difficult. Now, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they're passing around the perimeter and they're still finding open shots there because Carolina was just that bad defending the 3. But I find it hard to believe that if they didn't allow the dribble drive penetration that they were allowing, that Carolina wouldn't have been able to throw a much better perimeter defense out there against these guys. I think it's worth trying, but I'm not sure whether or not Hubert Davis is going to make those adjustments, because as we've learned with the head coach of the Tar Heels, he is a guy that is very stubborn when it comes to playing a certain way, playing his way out on the floor. And that's part of the reason why we don't see more zone defense. That's part of the reason we don't see more of the full court press that we've been asking him to throw out there. Because as you said, just speeding the game up today, making it a little bit more difficult, playing the game at the pace that you want to play at. This was, again, another game that felt like it was played exclusively at SMU's pace. And there were teams that shouldn't have been doing that in the non-conference against Carolina, let alone a team like SMU who was able to do it so successfully today. You need to be able to throw some different looks at these teams when they're finding success, especially from beyond the arc, and Carolina just wasn't able to do that in this one.
All right, let's get to the second takeaway that I wrote down. And this I thought was the difference in the ball game. The lack of production in the backcourt outside of Seth Trimble was costly. Kyan Evans, today doesn't do a lot confidence-wise that this is going to get corrected, that he's going to be the player he was brought in. He scores 3 points, 1 of 2 from the field, 1 of 1 from 3, 1 assist, 1 foul, 2 turnovers in 14 minutes. This is coming off his best game he played in a month, or in 2 months, really, when he scored 15 the other night against Florida State, was 5 of 15 from the field, but more importantly, 5 of 12 from 3. That equates to 40% shooting. You can live with that. And I knew we were in trouble the very first possession when he quite literally had the ball taken away from him.
Yeah.
I mean, just dribbled right into a turnover, and it was just all because he wasn't strong with the ball, not tough with the ball. Here's the other issue, though, is that, doesn't he need to play Derek Dixon more? He played Derek Dixon 17 minutes. He scored 3 points, was 1 of 5 from the field, 1 of 4 from 3. He did have 3 assists. I do think, probably the worst thing that happened for our expectations of Dixon is he made the 2 plays he made at Kentucky to help Carolina win that game. I'm not taking those moments back, though, because how much that game meant, just in terms of winning against that opponent in that environment. But Carolina's got to do something, because this ain't it. This ain't working. What you're getting from your one position, your one guard, you can't win a conference championship playing this way. And I don't know how deep you can advance into the NCAA tournament playing this way. Hubert Davis needs to make a decision. And I saw Ross Martin, tweet this out earlier. He's done a great job covering the Tar Heels for a long time. He's got his Big Hitters Only podcast, out right now. He does a great job covering the Heels from that perspective. And look, we all saw today where Hubert Davis told you who he trusts to run his offense, and that's Seth Trimble. So, at that rate, if you want to make him your point guard, great. You need to then incorporate Kyan Evans into your offense in terms of just being a shooter that you screen. I mean, you screen him over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And you just take the pressure off of him being a point guard. He's not a point guard. They're asking too much of where he is right now. Maybe a full year in the system, he becomes a point guard. But we've always talked about how much Carolina expects and demands from their point guard. No country demands more. It's too much for Kyan Evans right now. So make him your 2 guard, and then just make Derek Dixon your primary backup. But you can't keep interchanging these two the way that you're doing. Because if they both don't hit like they both didn't hit today, I mean, you're screwed. You just don't have enough on your roster to overcome that. And so this has to be something where the next week, that's an adjustment that, look, you can be stubborn as a head coach. You can't be stupid. If Hubert Davis and the staff fully evaluates what they're doing and what they've done, then they got to understand that what they're getting from Kyan Evans is not good enough for us to get where we want to get to regular season and in the postseason. And I don't think this is just a 1 game overreaction. This is a 15-game sample size of who Kyan Evans is as a basketball player. In those 15 games, I'm trying to pull the stats up here really quickly. Those stats equate to 6.4 points, 1.9 rebounds, 3.6 assists, on 37% shooting from the field and 32% shooting from behind the 3-point line. He's not doing what he's quite literally getting paid to do. This staff needs to do a better job putting him in a better position to be the best version of himself that he can be.
Yeah, and I mean, that was before he even came into today's game. So those numbers are going to go down because of how poor he performed in this one. So, I mean, yeah, it's nowhere near where you need it to be. I mean, we've had flashes from him. There's been moments where we point to and we say, oh, look, this is where maybe he turns the corner. This is where he showed us that, he was worth bringing in here. But I think he showed you the other day against Florida State what his real strength is, and that's shooting the ball from the outside in those catch and shoot situations, because Seth Trimble was doing a lot of what he did in this game, which was setting Carolina up on the offensive end of the floor. Well, if you're going to do that, then you need to fully buy into that role for Kyan Evans. And for him, I mean, he's got to be more consistent as a shooter, but I mean, yeah, you need to be looking to get him the ball on the perimeter, get him in those catch and shoot situations more often. It didn't feel like there were any of those moments today for Carolina. And this is what he's always been. We didn't realize it because it's hard when you go through the transfer portal cycle and everything like that, and you watch a lot of these guys on film. It's hard to get a great feel for them in 8 to 9 minutes of film watching. That's if they're a good enough player. There are some videos that are shorter than that in terms of some of the highlights that we get on these guys. So it was hard to tell that last year when he was at Colorado State, he was not a guy that was necessarily setting everything up for them. That was Nick Clifford who was doing a lot of that. He was a guy that was really playing off ball, and that's what allowed him to emerge in those final 15 games of the season. Maybe that's the same case here for Carolina. Maybe they do end up doing something similar, but they've got to make that decision at this point because, yeah, right now the point guard spot is giving you absolutely nothing. You have got no scoring out of that spot. It's putting up the same numbers that Elliot Cadeau was last year, if not even worse. I mean, 6 points from that spot today. I mean, that's not at all what you're looking for. You might as well have just kept Elliot Cadeau in the fold at that rate, even though, there would be more turnovers, you still would be getting similar scoring from that position. And then, yeah, I mean, Derek Dixon, 3 assists in the game, but, that shooting ability that we saw early on in the season, it just hasn't really carried over. And part of that is that he's a freshman. He's not guaranteed to be able to do anything. He wasn't as highly touted as maybe some people would lead you to believe. This wasn't a guy that was a 5-star. This wasn't someone that was expected to be what Caleb Wilson is expected to be. They knew it was going to take a little bit of time for him to develop, and you're trying to basically speed that timeline up because Kyan Evans isn't necessarily what you thought you got out of the transfer portal. That's why I think it's hard to expect a lot more out of Derek Dixon. It makes more sense to expect more out of Kyan Evans and put him in that off-ball role, allow him to be your catch-and-shoot 3-point option from out there, because right now you don't have that on this roster. We've still seen, Luka Bogovac struggle from beyond the arc. I mean, today was 2 of 4 from out there. That's where he scored all of his, or that's where he took all of his shots, and that's where he made all of his shots in this game. But he isn't necessarily that perimeter threat. Jonathan Powell only played 10 minutes today, and let's be honest, even when he's been on the floor, some of his production has been inconsistent on the offensive end of the floor. The reason I thought we should have saw him more today was because of what he would have done defensively, which I think would have given SMU a much different look. But offensively, he's kind of been hit or miss too. He hasn't been super consistent at knocking shots down from the outside. So maybe Kyan Evans can be that guy. You're coming off of a game where he knocked down 5 shots from the outside. He's had other moments like that this year where Seth Trimble has really been able to set him up for good performances. I point back to the first 2 games of the season where we saw him succeed. That was because Seth Trimble was out there, was doing a decent amount of the work, setting the table in those situations to get him some good looks. So hopefully that's what Carolina looks at this position more of moving forward. And for Kyan Evans, it's just about being more consistent from game to game. You got to have some sort of impact out of that position, because if this is what you're going to get from the point guard spot, then Carolina is going to be in some significant trouble here throughout conference play.
Well, I think what's really confounding this issue is that your best playmaker, you just can't play him at the one because it'd be a defensive mismatch the entire game. Because Luka Bogovac is Carolina's best playmaker. He's really effective in the pick and roll. He's Carolina's most creative passer. He's just got, I think, a really good feel for the game. The problem is he's a step slow defensively, and that's guarding threes. I can only imagine what would happen if he was trying to guard ones, and that's what's really hurting. I think Carolina right now is you need Luka's perimeter shooting, but you also need his playmaking. I mean, the guy today, has 8.6 assists and 1 turnover in 29 minutes and 4 rebounds. You could argue, one of his more complete games he's had all year. Going back to the 15-5-5 game he had against USC Upstate a few weeks ago, where we thought maybe that was going to be the turning point for him individually. And like it really makes you, it's almost impressive how much Carolina, thrives in terms of assists to field goal makes when your point guard is just as much as a non-factor as he is and has games where he just doesn't impact the game in any category whatsoever. But it's why the offense has the issues that it has. It's why they entered today, outside the top 40 in KenPom. And today they, as of right now, we still got some more games to go. They're 45th in KenPom after today. That should never be the case with the North Carolina offense. Not with the amount of talent that that this offense has. This offense should be better. It should be higher scoring. It should be more efficient. They should shoot the ball better. But this is all what happens when you've got a limited player at the point guard spot. Elliot Cadeau was limited because of his size, and really because he had a bad attitude. That usually was what played into him playing bad, was the fact he was smaller than everybody else on the court. And when he didn't get the call, didn't make a shot, I mean, he pouted like a 3-year-old. He would look better than with this roster than Kyan Evans has looked. Look at what the kid's doing at Michigan. He's a big reason why that might be the best team in the country, and they're really emerging as maybe the favorites to win a national championship. But Carolina decided to go in a different way. He decided to go in a different way. We can't look back and say, should Carolina have kept Elliot Cadeau? We can all sit here and agree that relationship had become too toxic with his mom, with himself, with the coaching staff, and us as fans, because we had no problem signing up on Twitter or Facebook to go after the kid, myself included. But so something's got to change. And Hubert's job is to maximize this roster and get the most out of the roster that they spent $14 million on to win basketball games. And let's not get it twisted, guys. They're 13-2. This is not a bad loss. You lost on the road to a team that was top 30 in the net. It's a quad 1 defeat. Both of your losses are to teams that I would imagine come Selection Sunday, they'll be on that 68 team bracket. But when you start 13-1 and you've played the way you played at times, you've elevated our expectation. You elevated our standard. And when you don't meet that, well, we're going to get mad. We're going to sit here and we're going to argue about it and yell about it for an hour or so. So I'll be really interested to see what they do with this week off. But there's got to be adjustments made, because if they keep going down this road, they're not going to, I think, achieve their fullest potential as a basketball team. And that would be a shame, considering we know we only have Caleb Wilson and Chapel Hill for 1 year. Did want to give Jared Stevenson some flowers. Not giving a game ball out because Carolina got beat. But, I mean, where would they have been today without him? 16 points off the bench, 5 of 6 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3, 3 of 4 from the line, 4 rebounds, did commit 4 fouls in 21 minutes. Finally got some offense to go along with his defense. And, he kept Carolina, effectively in the game in the first half. Hit some big threes in the second half as well when Carolina was trying to mount a comeback, and was just happy for him to finally see the ball go in the basket after, 2 months of really stellar play on the defensive end of the court that we've given a lot of praise to, but maybe not as much as we should have, for how much he's been a contributor to what Carolina has done defensively in their 13-2 start.
Yeah, I had to shout him out in the article. I thought he played really well today. 16 points on 5 of 6 from the field, 3 of 4 from beyond the arc, was 3 of 4 from the foul line. So even one of Carolina's more efficient guys at the free throw line in this game. And so this is the type of performance. This is what you're hoping for with him being on the bench, is that you're going to get somebody that can contribute like this off the bench. Right now, you don't have anybody else that you can necessarily count on. It's him and Jonathan Powell that you're looking to be able to contribute points off the bench consistently, because there really isn't anybody else. And so you need these types of performances from him moving forward. It sucks that it happens on a day where Carolina is so poor defensively, and also on a day where Carolina wasn't able to keep up offensively because the bigs just weren't scoring the way that they have in other games this season. But I thought he really was Carolina's best player. As you mentioned, in that first half, leading the team with 9 points was one thing, but I thought also had a couple of moments defensively that made you think that maybe Carolina could sort of turn things back in the right direction. I thought out of everybody that we looked at on the defensive end of the floor playing today, I thought he was one of the best defensive players, if not the best, on that end of the floor. It was just, unfortunately, it comes in a game where we can't really celebrate him a little bit more. And that's the unfortunate part about losing a game the way that you did against SMU.
All right, let's get to our discussion topic really quickly, then we will get out of this edition of the podcast. So Carolina has a week off. So it's really hard to really project into next week. But like what I wrote down was, I think what everyone's thinking after today. And no, it's not fire Hubert. No, it's not. They wasted $14 million. Critical of Hubert, frustrated with Hubert. Not gonna feed into that crap. That's not what we're about at this point. If he gets to that point, we'll sit here and we'll have that tough conversation, because that's what we do here. I just simply wrote down, was today a sign of things to come, i.e. defensive struggles, i.e. road losses, or is this just a blip on the radar? The last time a team shot over 60% against Carolina in a win was that Syracuse win back in 2024, which was, a road loss for Carolina when they went on to win an ACC regular season title. I'll remind you that after Carolina lost that game, you most famously said that they would not win an ACC championship. They would finish outside the top 3. So if you want to make some declaration that we won't win the league, please feel free to do so, because it feels like that worked against you in that moment, and I was very happy about it. So where do you stand? Because there was, as there is with this program, when Carolina loses, there's the measured reaction, and then there's the overreaction. I feel like we've been pretty measured. I ain't gonna lie. I was in the moment. I was pissed. Because I wanted this game. I thought Carolina was doing some things well enough to win the game, but I pretty much knew by the under 12 timeout in the second half, it wasn't going to happen. But we talked about how much better this league is top to bottom. And so, look, KenPom had Carolina projected to go 11-7 in the league. I thought that was maybe blasphemy, but maybe KenPom's, is a little bit smarter than I am. When you look at today, do you think this is something that we'll look back on and say this was just a one-off, or could this be something that we're talking about on a much more consistent basis with this team moving forward?
I tend to think the latter, to be honest with you, because I think the way that Carolina has played here recently, we saw it towards the end of non-conference play. We felt like they were sort of sleepwalking through certain games. It felt like that was a very similar notion the other night against Florida State, but we kind of chalked that up to Carolina returning from the break. I wonder, in some of these tougher games, is Carolina going to struggle on the defensive end of the floor to be able to contain certain teams, especially teams that shoot the ball well from the outside or have nights where they shoot the ball well from the outside. That's what scares me a lot about this. I don't know about necessarily the road aspect of it, because when you look at it, I mean, Carolina going on the road, like, I get it. You know, you can't count anything as a win. There's that, it isn't already in the win column. But I mean, look, you look at the games against Stanford, against Cal, you should be able to beat those teams on the road. Georgia Tech, you should be able to win those games. But when you get to some of the games later on in the season, at Miami, at NC State, at Syracuse, those are going to be much tougher games that Carolina is going to have to contend with. The good news is that, in order to get yourself built up to some of these road environments, because I do think the fact that it was only their second road game was certainly a factor in this game. I do think that you are going to get to build up to those more difficult games with some easier games in conference play. I mean, you do have to go on the road at Virginia in between California and Georgia Tech. But still, 3 out of 4 of those games are looked at as games that you should be able to win. I just wonder, when you play Virginia, when you play Louisville, when you play Duke, is this going to be, what crops itself up in those scenarios? I'll tell you today that my feeling that this team is in contention to win a national title, I don't know if that's necessarily the case after today. I think SMU is going to be a team that's probably going to be right on the bubble of making the NCAA tournament this year. I don't feel like this is something that we saw today is going to be able to carry over into the rest of ACC play. Like, I don't look at this team and think, man, this is a top 4 team in the ACC this season. I think they're a quality basketball team. I think Andy Enfield is a really good head coach, and I do think they will end up probably making the NCAA tournament. But this is a game that's going to show up as a loss to a team that was on the bubble. And so in terms of competing to win the ACC, I think Carolina's still got a shot to do that, to be a team that competes for the ACC. But it also wouldn't shock me if Carolina is a team that's closer to 12-6 in conference play, as opposed to a team that's 14-4, 15-3, based off of what we saw today, because I think teams are going to look at this as a blueprint of what you can do against Carolina, how you can, take them out of what they want to do on the offensive end, and sort of some of the things that you can do against them on the defensive end. For me, I think what they need to prove during this next stretch here, because you play Wake Forest at home, Stanford on the road, Cal on the road, and Notre Dame. You've got to find a way not to, you don't have to absolutely destroy these teams like you did to some of the teams in the non-conference, but can you win some of these games comfortably? And can you get back to the type of defensive intensity that we saw from this group early on in the season, where you can shut off those driving lanes and really prevent teams from being able to get those driving kick looks that you saw so often today? I think that's what Carolina has to be able to do during this stretch if they're going to have any chance to be able to do that against a team in Virginia that's much better offensively when they face them on Saturday, January 24th, which is not that far from now, believe it or not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack from what you said. Are they national title good? Probably. That answer today's no. Here's the good news. It's January 3rd. Do you want to be national title good January 3rd or March 3rd? I'd rather be national title good in March than January. The ACC, when we talk about what this league is, it's better. It's deeper. There's a higher level of talent. The coaching is what you expect this league to be. And Carolina's got to find a way to navigate that. And look, we got to start talking about Louisville maybe not even being the third best team in this conference. I mean, I think with what Virginia has done, and I know they lost at Virginia Tech, but they go on the road today. And I mean, they blew out an NC State team that everyone is waiting to take off. I think Virginia has really positioned themselves to maybe be the second or even the third team in this league. Then you maybe figure out, what Carolina and Louisville are behind, Duke and UVA. But, Louisville without Mikael Brown, it hasn't been pretty. It hasn't been easy. And there's, I don't know when he's going to be back healthy, but that's also a team that plays to the beat of one drum. When they make shots, they can play with anybody in the country. When they don't make shots, and by that I mean they don't make threes, they don't have a secondary way of beating you. So that's going to be something big to watch for them when they match up here later on in non-con play. I just don't want to erase the 13-1 start and say, well, because they lost today, this is what it's going to be for the next 16 games. I don't think that's fair to what this team has done. I don't think it's fair to what this coaching staff has done, because they've come a long way in a short period of time, and they navigated 42 days without their leader on the court. And they still won some games that they probably wouldn't have won in years past. And they need to draw from those experiences as they move on into league play. The better, you'd rather do this now as opposed to later, where it could just be a complete shock to the system, derail your confidence. I don't think this team is that fragile. I don't think this team is that mentally weak. Is 11-7 maybe what they're going to be in the league? Maybe. But I think that would be because of how good the league is and not how bad Carolina is. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out, what it looks like. But, we were kind of talking about this off the air. I don't see a team running through the league this year. You're probably looking at 14-4, maybe even 13-5. Like, we lamented the game against Florida State. And again, that game was at home, but they pushed Duke, 40 minutes today. Granted that was in their home gym, but that's just what I think this league is going to be. And that's what this team's got to find a way to play to as close to 40 minutes as possible to give themselves the best chance to win. And if they get there, we know how good they can be. And so I don't want to stand in the way of people wanting to vent or be frustrated, because we vented and I'm frustrated. Don't like losing. I don't get into this to watch my team lose. I want to watch my team win. We got 16 more of these. And I think they've done enough over the first 2 months to give them the benefit of the doubt. They come out and lose to Wake Forest at home, we'll have a different conversation.
Full panic mode.
But I do think you need to prepare yourself mentally, guys. They're not running through this league. They ran through their non-conference schedule. They're going to lose some games. That's
just college basketball. I mean, that's also part of it. That's just the modern era of college basketball, is that you're going to see these records in conference.
Unless you're Michigan.
Unless you're Michigan. Michigan's going to beat the hell out of everybody. And I mean, look, Arizona, maybe they end up dominating in the Big 12 as well. But I think for the most part in this conference, I think you've seen that there are some good teams. Like I said, I'm not as high on SMU as probably you are, but I do believe that they are still an NCAA tournament team. So you're right. This is not a bad loss for Carolina. It's certainly not a great loss. It's not one that you feel happy about. I think it's the style in which Carolina lost that has most people concerned and has them thinking maybe this is closer to, 12-6 in conference play than 14-4 and potentially challenging Duke. But I do want to say, I don't believe that, like, this is not one of those games. I'm seeing people on social media that are basically saying the season is over, that Carolina losing today proves that they have accomplished absolutely nothing. Guys, they went into the non-conference and beat Kansas, which we were begging for them to be able to do. As a program, they hadn't done it in however long. I'm forgetting how long it was now. But I mean, yeah, you're talking about an extensive losing streak against Kansas that gets ended. You go on the road to Kentucky and find a way to win that game. I know Kentucky's not great, but at the same time, that was one of those games that I don't think a lot of people expected Carolina was going to be able to win. And they were 13-1 in the non-conference. That's the best start that Carolina's had since 2008, 2009. And guys, There have been some schedules that have set up for Carolina to be that successful, and they just haven't been. So let's not panic completely, but at the same time, just take note that there are some areas on this team that need to get better, and there are some flaws that Carolina has probably had that we might have overlooked during that 13-1 start.
That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. In the meantime, guys, we would direct you guys to the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. The site's popping right now. ACC play underway, so we've got you covered with game previews and recaps. Anthony had the recap for today's loss. If you want to read about a loss, go do so, HeelToughBlog.com. It's also transfer portal season right now for college football. The portal opened yesterday. We got a 2-week window. Bill Belichick, Michael Lombardi, the staff, very busy hosting transfers, targeting transfers. Still some Carolina guys entering the portal. Some guys maybe not entering the portal. All that coverage can be found HeelToughBlog.com. So we want to get you guys to the website every single day. As I mentioned, that's HeelToughBlog.com for the best coverage of both Carolina basketball and Carolina football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Just search the Four Corners Podcast. It will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show. The Heels may have the week off. Doesn't mean the pod is taking the week off. We'll be back Thursday to preview the game against Wake Forest. But leading up to that, we've already got an edition of Ashton's analysis on the books. He's going to be ready to talk about this team after the loss. And then the hope is to finally get Brendan Marks on the pod, get some of the best guests on. Terrence Oglesby, a big fan of Caleb Wilson. Shelby Swanson, a trusted reporter from the News and Observer, maybe the only one that works at that outlet. We can get her on, talk a little Carolina basketball. We're going to get some guests on here to keep you locked in on the team while they enjoy a week off before we get you ready to go for that game against Wake Forest. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss any of the editions of the show for the rest of the regular season. If you're a video consumer of the pod, best way to consume us, like and follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow me on Twitter at HTB_Josh. The second we go live, you can jump in, be a part of the conversation, talking Carolina basketball like our good buddy Greg Ward, Willis Smith, and so many others were doing so here tonight. But with that is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.